Stand in a garden at the end of August and it looks like something is dying. The tomato vines have gone leggy and pale. The lettuce bolted weeks ago and turned bitter. There is a yellow tiredness over everything, a sense that the good part is behind you now, and that the only thing left to do is pull it all up and wait for next year. Almost everyone believes this, and almost everyone is wrong. By the time this is over, you will understand why the people who garden the longest, the ones who are still kneeling in the soil in their 80s and 90s, never once believed the season is ending in August. They know something the rest of us were never taught. Here is the promise, and you can hold me to it. By the end of this, you will know exactly what to put in the ground in the next few weeks, while your neighbors are folding up their tools and calling it a year. You will know why some of the sweetest food you will ever grow only becomes sweet after the first frost has touched it. And you will understand why the belief that the garden ends in autumn is not really about gardening at all. It is about a much older fear, the one that whispers that certain things in your own life are finished too, that the planting season for you is over, that whatever you did not start in your 20s or 30s you have somehow missed. That fear is a lie, and the garden is about to prove it. Picture the person standing at the edge of that late summer garden, coffee going cold in one hand, looking at the mess of it and feeling something close to grief. There is a specific sadness in that moment. It is the feeling of a thing winding down. Most people obey that feeling. They stop. They tidy up. They close the shed. And they surrender 4 or 5 perfectly good growing months to a story they never questioned. But there is another person, one you have probably met without noticing what made them different. This person looks at the same tired August garden and does not see an ending at all. They see empty beds warming in the sun. They see soil that is finally soft and workable. They see a second beginning hiding in plain sight, right there in the exhausted end of summer. And what separates those two people is not talent, and it is not luck, and it is certainly not age. It is one quiet piece of knowledge. So what is it that the year-round gardeners understand that keeps them planting when everyone else has quit? Hold that question, because the answer runs far deeper than kale and garlic. And by the time we get back to that cold coffee and that tired garden, you are going to see the whole thing differently. There is a moment every year, usually sometime in late August, when a quiet verdict passes through a neighborhood without a single word being spoken. You can almost feel it. One by one, the gardens go still. The watering slows. The weeding stops. Somebody pulls up the spent tomato plants and does not put anything back in the space they left. The season, everyone silently agrees, is over. Where did that agreement come from? Nobody sat you down and taught it to you. It arrived the way most powerful beliefs arrive, absorbed rather than learned. You saw the adults around you stop gardening in the fall, so you assumed that fall was where gardening stops. You watched the stores swap the seed racks for rakes and leaf bags, and you took the hint. The whole culture points in the same direction, and the direction it points is this. Summer is the growing time. Everything after summer is the ending. Now slow down and notice how strange that actually is, because it does not match what is happening in the ground beneath your feet. In most of the country, the soil in September is warmer than the soil in April. Think about that for a second. In spring, you rush outside the moment the frost lifts. You kneel in cold, wet dirt, and you plant with hope in your hands. In autumn, that same dirt is soft and sun-soaked and generous, and you walk away from it. You abandon the easier season to honor the harder one, purely out of habit. Here is a number that ought to stop you. In a great many regions, there are 8, 10, sometimes 12 full weeks of good growing weather left after the day most people quit. That is not a scrap of leftover time. That is an entire second season, long enough to grow whole crops from seed to plate. People walk away from a quarter of the gardening year every single autumn, not because the weather told them to, but because a story told them to. And the story is seductive because it feels like wisdom. It feels responsible to accept that things end. It feels mature to stop striving, to pull up the plants and close the season with a kind of graceful resignation. But there is a difference between wisdom and surrender, and the last harvest myth quietly dresses one up as the other. Real gardeners know the difference. They know that accepting a true ending is wise, and that inventing an ending that is not really there is just giving up early. Ask yourself something honest. How many things in your life have you closed the book on, not because they were actually finished, but because it was simply the time of year when people are supposed to stop. How many gardens have you pulled up while the ground was still warm? Because the same voice that says the growing is over in August is the same voice that shows up later in the second half of a life and says the same quiet thing about you. And it is wrong both times. The proof is under the soil, and we are about to dig into exactly what it is doing down there while everyone assumes it has gone to sleep. Kneel down. Push your fingers into a garden bed in the middle of September, past the dry crust on top, down into the cooler dark where the roots live. What you feel there is the whole secret, and it contradicts everything the calendar told you. The ground is not shutting down. The ground is at the height of its powers. All summer long, the sun has been pouring energy into that soil, and soil holds heat the way a stone holds heat after a fire has died. By early autumn, the earth has banked months of warmth, and it lets that warmth go slowly, night after night, long after the air has started to cool. This is why a seed dropped into September soil often sprouts faster than the same seed in April. The bed is warm from below, not just from above, and warmth from below is exactly what a young root wants. Spring planting is an act of faith in weather that has not arrived yet. Autumn planting is a partnership with warmth that is already here. There is more happening down there than heat. The soil in late summer is alive in a way it never quite manages in spring. A whole invisible city of fungi and microbes and earthworms has spent the entire warm season building itself up, breaking down old leaves and roots, threading the dirt with the fine channels that let water and air move. When you plant into that in September, you are not planting into tired, used up ground. You are planting into the richest, most biologically awake soil of the entire year. The garden did not exhaust itself over the summer. It spent the summer getting ready for exactly this. There is a reason the old-timers used to say that a garden is built in the fall, not the spring. Everything you do to the soil in autumn compounds. The compost you work in now has all winter to break down and feed the ground. The bed you clear and plant now is a bed you are not scrambling to prepare in the frantic rush of spring. The gardener who works with the autumn ground is always a season ahead, quietly banking effort while everyone else has stopped, so that when spring finally arrives, they are not starting from nothing, but continuing from something already alive. The ground rewards the person who keeps showing up after the crowd has left. Consider the humble comparison of two carrots. One is sown in April into cold, stiff, barely awake soil, and it fights its way up slowly through a hostile spring. The other is sown in late August into warm, soft, living earth, and it germinates in days and races downward while the ground is still generous. The autumn carrot often has an easier start in life than the spring one ever did. The gardener who understands this is not working harder than everyone else. They are simply working with the season that is actually there, instead of mourning the one that is leaving. And here is the part that turns the whole thing around. Cooler air above the soil, combined with warm earth below, is close to the perfect condition for a huge range of plants. The brutal heat of July stresses lettuce and spinach, and every leafy green makes them bolt and turn bitter and give up. September takes that stress away. The days are softening, the nights are cool, the soil is warm and rich, and suddenly the exact plants that struggled in high summer find themselves in paradise. The garden is not closing. For a whole category of food, the garden is finally opening. So the image of the dying autumn garden is not just a little bit wrong. It is upside down. The moment when everyone decides the ground is finished is very close to the moment the ground is at its most ready, which raises the obvious question, the practical one, the one you can act on this very week. If the soil is this alive right now, what exactly do you put into it? What are the few things that will thrive in this second season while everyone else is packing up? That is where we go next, and the list is shorter and simpler than you think. You do not need to be an expert to catch the second season. You do not need a greenhouse or special equipment or years of experience. You need a small handful of the right plants and a few weeks of nerve while your neighbors give you puzzled looks over the fence. Let us walk through what actually goes in the ground now and why each one is almost designed for this exact moment. Start with the leafy greens, because they are the easiest win in all of gardening, and autumn is their true home. Lettuce, spinach, arugula, and the whole family of Asian greens like bok choy and mustard grow fast, ask very little, and love the cool, bright days of fall. Seeds you scatter in early September can be leaves on your plate in 5 or 6 weeks. These are the plants that suffered all through the heat of summer, bolting and turning bitter the moment the temperature climbed. Now the temperature is on their side. Plant them now and they will reward you with weeks of tender, sweet harvest right up to, and often past the first frost. Then there are the roots. Radishes are the sprinters, ready in as little as a month, perfect for the impatient and the doubtful, because nothing convinces you the season is not over quite like pulling a fat red radish out of October soil. Carrots and beets take longer but hold beautifully in the cooling ground, and as you will see shortly, the cold does something to them that summer never could. Turnips grow quickly and give you both a root and a green. None of these mind the shortening days. All of them prefer the falling temperatures to the fierce heat they would have faced in June. Now the one that feels almost like a secret, the plant that separates the people who understand the long game from everyone else. Garlic. You put garlic in the ground in the autumn, often as late as October, and then you walk away and let winter happen. It sends down roots in the cool soil, sleeps through the cold, and comes roaring back in spring to give you a harvest the following summer. Planting garlic is a quiet act of faith. It is you, in the dying light of the year, making a promise to a version of yourself nearly a full year away. There is almost nothing else in the garden that asks you to think in those terms, and there is almost nothing more satisfying than pulling those bulbs the next July and remembering the cold afternoon you planted them. And do not forget the cover crops, the plants you grow not to eat but to feed the soil itself. Scatter something like crimson clover or field peas or winter rye over an empty bed in fall, and it will blanket the ground through the cold, protect it from washing away in winter rain, and then be turned under in spring to leave the soil richer than you found it. This is the most advanced trick in the beginner's toolbox, and it is really just this. Even the beds you are not harvesting from can be working for you all winter long. There is one simple habit that makes all of this easy, and it takes the guesswork out of the whole thing. Find out the average date of the first frost where you live. Every region has one, and it is a number you only ever have to learn once. Then count backwards. If a variety of lettuce says it matures in 45 days, and your first frost tends to arrive in the middle of October, then late August and early September is your window, with room to spare. Most greens want somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks. Radishes want 3 or 4. That is the entire calculation. You are not gambling. You are reading a simple map that tells you exactly how much runway you have, and in most of the country that runway is far longer than people assume. The person who quits in August is not out of time. They simply never check the clock. And do not let a small yard or no yard at all stop you. A single container on a back step will grow a crop of autumn lettuce. A window box will give you greens into the cold. A few pots of herbs pulled close to the house will carry on long after the main beds have quieted. The second season does not require acreage or ambition. It requires a handful of soil, a few seeds, and the willingness to begin at the exact moment the world is telling you to stop. Look at that list again. Greens, roots, garlic, cover crops. That is not a desperate attempt to squeeze a little more out of a dying year. That is a real season with a real harvest and a real purpose. And the strangest, most wonderful part is what happens to some of these plants when the temperature does exactly the thing everyone fears. That is the paradox we turn to now. There is a phrase that experienced gardeners use with a small knowing smile, and most people have never heard it. The second spring. It describes something that sounds impossible if all you know is the summer garden. It describes the way autumn, the season everyone treats as the long, slow death of the garden, can actually feel more like a rebirth than an ending. Walk into a well-kept garden in early October, and it does not look like a place that is closing down. It looks like a place waking up. The lettuce that would have been a bitter, bolted mess in August is now a lush, cool green carpet. The spinach is thick and sweet. Rows of young carrots and radishes and beets are pushing up in tidy lines. The whole space has a freshness to it, a second youth, and it arrives precisely when the rest of the world has decided the show is over. That is the second spring, and once you have seen it, you never quite trust the story about autumn again. Why does it feel so much like spring? Because the plant does not read a calendar. A lettuce seed does not know it is September. It only knows what it feels, and what it feels in autumn is remarkably similar to what it would feel in April. Cool air, softening light, moist, workable soil, shorter, gentler days. To the plant, spring and fall are close to mirror images, two cool, bright shoulders on either side of the harsh heat of summer. The plant that thrives in one thrives in the other. We call one a beginning and the other an ending, but the plant experiences them almost the same way. The difference is entirely in our heads. And here is the quiet reason the second spring is often better than the first. In spring, you are racing the clock in one direction. Every day is getting hotter, and you are trying to grow your cool weather crops before the heat arrives and ruins them. It is a sprint with a deadline breathing down your neck. In autumn, the clock runs the other way, and it runs in your favor. Every day is getting a little cooler and a little gentler. Your greens are not racing to beat the heat. They are settling deeper into the exact conditions they love, and they will hold in the garden for weeks without turning bitter or bolting, because there is no oncoming heat to force them. Autumn gives you something spring never can. It gives you time that is on your side instead of against you. Ask yourself when you last felt genuinely new at something in the second half of your life. Not competent, not experienced, but new, the way a beginner is new, with that particular lightness that comes before you are supposed to know what you are doing. The second spring hands you that feeling for free. Planting in autumn feels faintly rebellious, a little bit like getting away with something, because everyone around you has agreed the time for beginnings has passed. And there is a specific joy in doing a hopeful thing in a season built for giving up. It wakes up a part of you that goes quiet when life becomes nothing but maintenance, the part that plants for the sheer, stubborn pleasure of watching something start. There is a ray engagement of the senses in this season too, one that summer, for all its abundance, rarely offers. The light in October comes in low and golden and long. The air is clean and cool on your arms as you kneel to harvest. There are no clouds of insects, no oppressive humidity, no wilting midday heat that drives you indoors. Gardening in the second spring is one of the genuine pleasures of the whole year, and it is a pleasure almost nobody claims, because almost everybody has already gone inside and closed the door on the season. So think about what that means. There is an entire second spring available to you every single year, a fresh green beginning tucked inside what you were taught to see as the end, and most people walk right past it. They pull up their gardens at the first hint of autumn and miss the best growing weather of the year. But the second spring has one more gift to give, and it is the strangest of all, because it comes disguised as the very thing that is supposed to kill a garden. It comes with the cold. Frost is supposed to be the enemy. That is the whole logic of ending the garden in autumn. You pull everything up before the frost comes because frost kills, and once the frost has been, the season is truly and finally done. It is one of the most deeply held beliefs in all of gardening, and for a whole set of plants it is not just wrong, it is backward. For these plants, the frost is not the thing that ends them. The frost is the thing that perfects them. Here is what actually happens inside a carrot, or a parsnip, or a leaf of kale when the cold arrives. The plant senses the drop in temperature, and it does something clever to protect itself, because ice inside its own cells would tear it apart. To keep from freezing solid, the plant converts some of its stored starches into sugars, and those sugars act like a natural antifreeze, lowering the freezing point inside the plant and keeping its cells safe through the cold nights. The plant is not trying to please you, it is trying to survive, but the side effect of that survival is that it fills itself with sugar. The cold, quite literally, makes it sweet. You can taste this. It is not a subtle theory, it is a difference you notice on the first bite. A carrot pulled from the ground after a few hard frosts is dramatically sweeter than the same carrot pulled in the heat of summer. Kale, which can be tough and faintly bitter in warm weather, turns tender and mild and almost candy sweet once the cold has worked on it. Parsnips are barely worth eating until frost has hit them, and then they become one of the great pleasures of the winter kitchen. Brussels sprouts, spinach, collard, leeks, the whole hardy tribe follows the same rule. The cold does not ruin them. The cold is the final ingredient, the thing that finishes them the way heat finishes bread. Sit with how completely this overturns the story. The exact event that everyone treats as the death of the garden, the arrival of frost, is the event that makes some of the finest food of the entire year. The gardener who pulls everything up in September to beat the frost is not saving their harvest. They are throwing away its best chapter. They are picking the carrot the day before it was going to become delicious. They are ending the story one page before the payoff. Think for a moment about how long people have known this, because it is not some clever modern discovery. Long before anyone understood the chemistry of starches turning to sugars, gardeners knew to leave the parsnips in the ground until after the frost. They knew the kale got better in November. They knew to wait. It was passed down at the edge of gardens from one generation to the next, a piece of practical wisdom carried in the hands rather than written in a book. Your great-grandparents very likely knew that the cold sweetened the carrots, even if they could not have told you why. Somewhere in the last few generations, as food moved from the backyard to the store shelf, that knowledge quietly slipped away, and a whole culture forgot that the best of the harvest often comes last, after the cold. And notice the deeper pattern here, because we are going to need it soon. Something that looks like an ending, something that looks like hardship and cold and the closing down of things, turns out to be the very thing that brings out the sweetness. The plant does not become sweet in spite of the cold. It becomes sweet because of the cold. It needed the hard season to become the best version of itself. There is no shortcut to that sweetness. You cannot get it in July, no matter how much sun and warmth and ease you give the plant. It only comes on the far side of a frost. Hold on to that, because it is not only true of carrots. But before we follow that thread all the way to where it leads, there is one more myth to break, the biggest one of all. The idea that once winter truly arrives, the garden is finally, undeniably empty. It is not. And what stands out there in the cold, quietly alive, is going to surprise you. Look out at a garden in the deep cold of winter and it seems like the argument is finally settled. The trees are bare. The flower beds are brown and flattened. Everything is still. Surely now, at last, the garden is empty and the season is genuinely over. This is the final stronghold of the myth, the moment even the hopeful give in. And even here, even in the dead of winter, the myth does not hold. Go out to that seemingly empty garden and brush the snow off a bed of kale. There it stands, green and firm and alive, having shrugged off temperatures that would have flattened a summer plant weeks ago. Push aside the frozen crust of the soil and there are carrots down there, sweeter now than they have ever been, holding patiently in the cold earth like food in a natural refrigerator. Leeks stand in their rows like small green sentries. Under a simple blanket of straw, there are still roots to pull. The garden that looks empty is not empty at all. It is stocked. It is holding. It is quietly feeding whoever knows to keep looking. This is one of the oldest kinds of gardening wisdom, and it has been almost entirely forgotten. For most of human history, the winter garden was not a curiosity. It was survival. People did not grow food only in summer and then simply hope to make it to spring. They planted hardy crops that would stand through the cold. They buried roots in sand in cool cellars. They knew that a well-planned garden fed a family across the whole year, not just the easy, warm part of it. The idea that food only comes in summer is a very modern idea, and it arrived only when the grocery store made it possible to forget how the seasons actually work. There is a quiet pleasure in this that is hard to describe until you have felt it. Picture a gray afternoon in the middle of winter, the kind of day when most people would not dream of going outside for anything green. You pull on a coat, walk out to the garden through the cold, and lift the edge of a cover to find crisp living leaves waiting underneath, glistening and firm. You cut a handful for dinner and carry them back to a warm kitchen. There is a small triumph in that walk, a feeling of having outwitted the season, of eating from your own ground on a day the calendar swore was barren. People who have never done it cannot quite believe it is possible. People who have done it once tend to do it every year after, because that walk back to the kitchen with winter greens in hand is one of the small, deep satisfactions of a life lived close to the ground. And you do not need to be tough or extreme to do this. A little protection goes an astonishingly long way. A layer of straw over a carrot bed. A simple cover of fabric draped over a row of greens on the coldest nights. A cold frame, which is really just a box with a clear lid that traps the low winter sun, can keep a salad growing through weather that seems impossibly harsh. These are not high-technology solutions. They are the same humble tricks gardeners have used for centuries. and they turn the supposedly dead months into a season that still gives. Think about what the winter garden really is, underneath the frost and the straw. It is proof, standing right there in the coldest, darkest part of the year, that life does not stop just because conditions get hard. It is proof that with a little foresight and a little protection, growing things can not only survive a season everyone wrote off as death, but can hold their goodness right through the middle of it. The winter garden does not fight the cold and lose. It settles into the cold and endures, patient and alive, waiting for the hand that knows to reach for it. So now the whole myth has fallen. Late summer is not the end. Autumn is a second spring. Frost is not death but sweetness. Winter is not empty but stocked. At every point where we were taught the garden closes down, it is actually still open to anyone who knows how to look. And that is the moment to finally turn the question around, away from the soil and toward ourselves. Because if all of this is true of a garden, the uncomfortable and beautiful question is whether it might also be true of a life. Let us be honest about why the autumn garden pulls at something so deep in us. It is not really about vegetables. When a person stands at the edge of a fading garden in late summer and feels that specific grief, the winding down, the sense that the good part is behind them, they are not only looking at their tomatoes, they are looking at a mirror. The garden going quiet in autumn speaks directly to the oldest fear a person carries into the second half of life, the fear that their own planting season is over. You know this fear even if you have never said it out loud. It is the voice that says it is too late now. Too late to start the thing you always meant to start. Too late to learn it, to build it, to change direction, to plant something new and expect to see it grow. It says the time for beginnings was back in the warm, early summer of your life, in your 20s and your 30s, and that what you did not plant then you have simply missed, and that the responsible, mature thing to do now is to accept the ending and tidy up and wait quietly for winter. That voice sounds exactly like the voice that tells a gardener to pull everything up in August, and it is wrong in exactly the same way. Everything we just walked through in the soil is a rebuttal to that fear, point for point. The ground is warmest when you think it is finished. The richest, most alive soil of the whole year is the soil everyone abandons. There is a second spring waiting on the far side of the peak, gentler and more generous than the first, with time running in your favor instead of against you. And the sweetest fruit of all, the carrot and the kale and the parsnip, only becomes sweet after the cold has done its work, on the far side of a frost, after a hard season that looked from the outside like nothing but loss. None of that is only about plants. All of it is a description of a human life that most people are never given. Think about garlic one more time. You plant it in the dying light of the year, into cold ground, with no harvest in sight for the better part of a year. You will not taste it next week or next month. You are planting it for a self almost a full year away, on faith, in the season when everyone else has quit. Is there a better picture of what it means to begin something meaningful in the later half of a life? The people who plant gardens in their 60s and 70s and 80s are not confused about how much time they have. They are doing the most clear-eyed thing a person can do. They are putting something in the ground precisely because the season is late, because a late planting is still a planting, because the alternative is to look at warm and living soil and choose to grow nothing. Here is the concrete truth underneath all of it. The garden does not care how late in the year it is. It only cares whether you are willing to put something in the ground. Warm soil plus a seed equals growth, in September as surely as in May, and the plant never once asks what month it is or whether it is allowed to grow now. It simply grows because that is what living things do when given half a chance. And a person is a living thing too. The soil of a life stays warm and workable far later than anyone tells you. And the only thing that ever truly ends the growing season is the decision to stop planting. Which brings us, finally, back to that question left hanging at the very beginning. The one thing the people who garden into their 90s understand, that the rest of us are never taught. It is time to answer it, and the answer has been quietly growing under everything we have said. Somewhere near you, right now, there is a person well into their later years who is still gardening, still out there in the cool of an autumn morning, kneeling in the dirt, tucking garlic into the ground for a harvest they fully intend to be around to pull. You have probably met someone like this. There is something about them that is hard to name and easy to feel. a steadiness, a kind of quiet, unhurried peace that the anxious and the young rarely have. And it is worth asking, plainly, what they know that the rest of us do not. Researchers who study the parts of the world where people most reliably live long, healthy, contented lives keep stumbling onto the same unremarkable detail. In these communities, people garden, not as a hobby they picked up and put down, but as a constant, an unbroken thread that ran straight through the whole of their lives and did not stop at any particular age. They were putting things in the ground in their 60s and their 70s and their 80s, and they were still doing it in their 90s. The garden was not something they retired from. It was one of the things that seemed to keep them here, engaged and moving and needed and alive, decade after decade. And here at last is the thing they understand, the piece of knowledge that separates them from the crowd that quits every August. They do not divide the year into a growing season and a dead season, and they do not divide a life into a planting time and a waiting to end time. For them there is no such line. There is only the ongoing, unbroken practice of tending something that is alive and helping it grow, in every season, at every age, right to the end. The cold does not send them inside for good. The lateness of the year does not stop their hands. They plant in autumn because autumn is a fine time to plant, and they keep beginning things in the late chapters of their lives for exactly the same reason. Because the soil is still warm, because a seed still grows, because the season is never actually over until you decide it is. There is a particular person worth picturing here. Somewhere there is a woman past 80 who still keeps a small autumn garden, and if you watched her on a cool October morning, you would see something instructive. She moves slowly now, and she knows it. She does not pretend the years have not passed, and yet there she is, on her knees in the cool dirt, firming the soil over a row of garlic she will not harvest until the following July. She is not doing this out of denial. She is doing it out of the plainest kind of hope there is, the kind that has stopped needing to explain itself. She plants for a summer she fully intends to see, and in planting she quietly insists on being here for it. That single act, repeated every autumn for decades, is one of the reasons she is still the calmest, clearest, most present person at any table she sits at. She never signed the agreement that says the growing is over. Notice what this does to a person over time. Someone who plants garlic every October is a person who has quietly told themselves, year after year, that there is a next summer worth planting for and that they intend to be in it. Someone who keeps a winter garden is a person who refuses to accept the empty season as truly empty. These are not just gardening habits. They are a whole posture toward being alive, practiced with a trowel, that treats every ending as another beginning in disguise. And a person who lives inside that posture for decades becomes, slowly, someone the rest of us look at with a kind of longing, because they seem to have escaped the fear that quietly runs the rest of our lives. You do not have to wait until you are 90 to learn this. That is the gift hidden in the whole thing. The lesson is available to you in the next few weeks in the most ordinary way imaginable for the price of a packet of seeds and a little willingness to look foolish planting them while your neighbors rake leaves. Put something in the ground this autumn. Watch it grow when everyone told you the growing was done. And feel in your own hands and your own soil the belief begin to loosen. The belief that says it is too late, because your hands will be holding the proof that it is not. So let us go back now. Back to the beginning, to that tired garden at the end of August, and the cold coffee, and the person standing there feeling the season slip away. Let us look at it one more time, now that we know what we know. Stand again at the edge of that late August garden. The vines are still leggy and pale. The lettuce still bolted weeks ago. The yellow tiredness is still lying over everything, and the coffee in your hand has still gone cold. Nothing about the scene has changed. But you are not the same person looking at it, and that changes everything. Where you once saw an ending, you now see beds warming in the low sun, holding months of banked heat, waiting. Where you once saw the good part slipping behind you, you now see the richest, most alive soil of the entire year, right there, offered up at the exact moment everyone else walks away. Where you once felt grief, that quiet winding down, you now feel something closer to the opposite, a small pull of possibility, because you know now that there is a second spring hiding inside this tired scene, a whole season of sweet cold weather harvests waiting on the far side of a frost that has not even arrived yet. The garden did not change. The story you were telling about it changed, and the story was the only thing that was ever really ending. That is the whole secret the year-round gardeners have been keeping, though they would never call it a secret, because to them it is simply obvious. The season ends when you stop planting and not one day before. The soil does not close on a date. The ground does not read the calendar. Warmth and a seed make growth in October as surely as in May. And the only frost that ever truly kills a garden is the one that forms inside the gardener. The quiet, cold certainty that says it is too late now. Put down your tools. The good part is behind you. You can refuse that frost. You can kneel down in the warm September dirt while everyone else is closing their sheds, and you can plant. Greens for a harvest in 6 weeks. Garlic for a promise you are making to yourself next summer. Carrots that the cold itself will turn to sugar. You can be the person at the edge of the garden who looks at the end of the season and simply does not believe in it, because you have seen with your own hands what grows after everyone says the growing is done. And what is true in the soil is true in the life. The warm ground of a second half is longer and more generous than anyone ever tells you, and the sweetest things you will ever grow are the ones that come after the cold, on the far side of a hard season, planted late by someone who refused to believe the year was over. So put something in the ground this autumn. Any small living thing will do. It does not have to be much, and it does not have to be perfect, and no one has to understand why you are doing it while the rest of the street rakes leaves. Then stand back, in the low gold light, with the cold coffee gone from your hand and something new tucked into the warm earth, and watch the oldest lie you were ever told quietly come apart in front of you. The garden was never ending. It was only ever asking whether you would keep planting.